Hey everybody, it's low carb and keto friendly nutritionist Amy Berger from 2itnutrition.com bringing you another video in doing keto without the crazy. I love that phrase. I'm so glad you guys love it too. I'm starting to get a lot of good feedback from you on that. Before we get into today's topic, just a quick reminder that my book, The Stall Slayer, is available on Amazon. Amazon.com. I'll put a link below. It's available as a paperback. It's a little skinny book. You'll be able to read it in a very short amount of time. It's also available for Kindle. And if you want to buy it right now and have it in your inbox in seconds, you can actually still download the PDF version. Go to my website, stallslayer.com, and you can buy the PDF. But it is on Amazon. It's available internationally. I've had people buy it in Japan and Brazil and the Netherlands and the UK and Canada. So check your nation's Amazon site if you are watching from outside the US. Okay, next order of business, I guess, is just the business. Is keto dangerous? You have probably heard or read, maybe even from your own doctor or from well-meaning friends and family, that keto is going to kill you. It's bad for your heart. It's going to clog your arteries. Everyone knows Dr. Atkins died from a heart attack. No, he didn't. We'll get to that in a minute. Keto is bad for your bones. It leaches calcium. All that meat, it's so acidic, it leaches calcium out of your bones. Your kidneys are going to explode. Your brain needs 1,000,000 tons of glucose. Keto's going to kill you. Holy moly, people, this nonsense has got to go. Let's clear up things, shall we? Okay. First of all, no, Dr. Atkins did not die from a heart attack. That's totally unrelated to the video, though. I did a 3-part video on Dr. Robert Atkins and how absolutely brilliant and way ahead of his time he was. I will put links to those in the notes. So back to keto. If many of you, I'm sure, know the history of keto, but if you're new, you might not be aware that the ketogenic way of eating, very, very low carb, higher fat, was not developed to be a weight loss diet. It was not developed to help people reverse type 2 diabetes or to improve metabolic syndrome or PCOS or anything that we use it for very commonly now. The ketogenic diet was initially developed as a treatment for epilepsy. There were a lot of children, and so this was before the existence of anti-epilepsy drugs, of anti-seizure drugs. There was no way to treat epilepsy, basically, except fasting. And eventually, doctors and researchers realized that, hey, we could get a lot of the same neurological effects of fasting just by having someone eat hardly any carbohydrate. Like, they're getting all the same benefits of fasting, but they don't actually have to fast. They can eat, they just can't eat very much carbohydrate. So at that time, now we're talking about 100 years ago, this is the 1920s. At that time, they didn't, obviously it was the early days. This was the initiation of this treatment. They didn't know what we know now. We've had a century's worth of research on this way of eating that we know a lot more. At that time, when the ketogenic diet was first developed, it wasn't just a ketogenic diet, meaning very, very low in carbs and high in fat. The way that they would start these kids out was that they not only were they super carbohydrate restricted, they were protein restricted. They had to limit the amount of protein they were consuming. For some of these kids, they also fluid restricted them, meaning they couldn't drink to thirst. They couldn't, if they were thirsty, they couldn't necessarily always drink water. They were limited in how much fluid they could take in. So guess what? When you restrict somebody's protein intake, especially a growing child, when you restrict their fluid, what are you going to have? What's going to happen? You're probably going to have some dehydration, you're going to have some electrolyte imbalances, and you're going to have growth stunting. You might have kidney stones, right? And all of these things were outcomes that were documented in these children in the early days of keto. The early days of keto, not now, not in the modern incarnation of just carbohydrate restriction. Nobody who does keto now is intentionally restricting their water intake, or I hope you're not. No, some of you might be restricting your protein intake. There's really no need to. I'm going to link to a blog post I wrote about this protein fear-mongering, which is absolutely nonsense. There's actually one of the chapters in the Stall Slayer has a big section on stop worrying about eating too much protein. So nobody really does that anymore. And we also know a little more about the importance of getting enough sodium, magnesium, and potassium. So all of these crazy, gnarly things that happened, and they did happen. I'm not saying these things didn't happen on keto, but for someone to claim now, well, keto's dangerous because you'll get kidney stones, or keto's dangerous because you'll have growth stunting, that is their way of broadcasting the fact, hey, guess what? I haven't read anything on research on the ketogenic diet for the past 40 years. I'm basing my information to you on century-old information. Woohoo! Literally, they are advertising to you the fact that they have not read one shred of more recent research where none of these weird, crazy things happen. And so with regard to the protein and the bone issue, right? Where people say it's bad for bones, again, that comes from thinking that keto is a high protein diet. And there's a lot to untangle there. I'm trying to have shorter videos, so I won't go into super crazy detail, but again, I'll read the protein. Well, actually, it's a separate post. I did a post on protein and gluconeogenesis, and I have an entirely separate post devoted to debunking the myth that a high protein intake is bad for bones. And I'm putting high in the air quotes because the truth is, most people who are doing keto are not eating a high protein diet. Most of us are eating a normal protein diet. Most people who go keto don't actually increase their protein, their absolute protein intake at all. The percentage might go up because you've cut the carbs way down. By default, protein and fat are going to make up a higher percentage of your calories. But if you're eating the same absolute amount of protein in grams, guess what? You're not eating any more protein than you were. But anyway, for most, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other people, even if you did increase protein on keto, it's still not a high protein diet. It's a normal protein diet. It's a physiologically appropriate protein diet, because the truth is, most people are eating too little protein. In their normal, everyday, high carb life, most people are eating an inadequate protein diet. So when you go keto, even if you're eating higher protein than you were, it's still not high by how I would define it. Now, even if it was a high protein diet, however you want to define that, this idea that a high protein diet acidifies the blood, and in order to buffer that acidity, your body leaches calcium and other minerals out of the bone, is just nonsense. It's garbage. I won't go into a ton of detail because all the details you could possibly want are in that blog post about the bones. But if anything, just about all the research I've found on this shows unequivocally that higher protein intakes are better for bones. They increase bone mass. What are your bones made out of? I'll wait. They are made out of protein. They're not, your bones aren't like sticks of chalk. They're not just calcium wrapped around nothing. They're calcium and minerals and hydroxyapatite crystals wrapped around protein. So no, your bones are not gonna disintegrate if you go on a ketogenic diet. What about the kidneys? Surely all that red meat, meat, it's gonna kill you, it's gonna explode kidneys, they can't process all that meat. What the hell does that even mean? Your kidneys can't process? If anyone ever says to you keto's dangerous, it's not your job to tell them why it's not dangerous. It's their job to tell you why it is. And most of them won't even come up with these fake answers like it's bad for your bones, it's bad for your heart, it's bad for your kidneys. They'll just say, well, I don't know, I just heard it's bad. Prevention Magazine said it's bad. Like, they can't even come up with a fake answer, let alone a potentially true answer. So anyway, it's not your job to debunk this, but if you wanted to, again, keto is not a high protein diet. It's a normal protein diet, and for most people, it's normo protein, meaning it's or like protein neutral compared to what they were eating before. It's the same amount of protein. And it's not bad for your kidneys. I don't really know how to say anything more about it. I did, again, a whole blog post on the impact of dietary protein on kidney function. I'll link to it. I didn't make this stuff up. There is everything I say is referenced. If I say anything controversial, it's referenced. There's a study you can look at. And I know some people will say, well, for every study there's an equal and opposite study. Yeah, maybe there is. But there's so many people trying to make the nonsense argument that protein's bad for the kidneys that I purposely did stick to the research that said, no, the protein's not bad for the kidneys. You know what the two single most harmful, damaging things to the kidneys are? High blood sugar and high insulin. Guess what you don't have when you're on a ketogenic diet? High blood sugar and high insulin. So, this is, we know that people with diabetes, whether it's type 2 or type 1, they have massive kidney damage, and it's because of the glucose and also in part because of the insulin. These are non-issues on keto, and there were, in that blog post, I really hope you read those posts. They're very, very long, but they're very informative. Like if you have lingering concerns about whether it's keto and bones and protein or kidneys, or specifically protein and kidneys and bone, take some time, get yourself a cup of coffee or tea, read those posts. You will walk away feeling very comfortable and confident about continuing with your ketogenic or higher protein diet. You will have no reservations whatsoever about eating as much protein as you want. So I actually quoted from, I think, and the reference is there. You can click on the link in that blog post from, if I recall correctly, the National Kidney Foundation, or like the National Kidney Association, these kinds of things, or maybe the NIH. And they listed 12 or 13 factors in kidney disease. 12 or 13 things. You know what was not included? A high protein intake. And these organizations, we're talking about the NIH or the National Kidney Foundation, we are talking about the most mainstream of mainstream organizations, the most conventional of conventional organizations. You can absolutely bet, if there was even a whiff, like even a small hint, that a high protein intake could be harmful for the kidneys, they would be beating that drum as loud and as hard as they could, and there is silence. There is nothing, there is not one word about a high protein intake being bad for the kidneys, because it's not. So, what else can I say? Let me think if there's any other specific reasons. Oh, of course, the cardiovascular stuff. There's no way on earth a diet where you can eat bacon and butter and cheese and red meat and coconut oil, it's like 91% saturated fat. There is no way that you can eat this stuff and not die from a heart attack. Really? Again, anyone who's saying that is just waving the banner saying, I haven't read anything about this way of eating in at least 20 years. Because there's so much published research coming out now, randomized clinical trials showing that carbohydrate restriction, not even always at ketogenic levels, but just cutting the carbohydrate at all, does several very, very good things for cardiovascular health. One, you can almost set your watch by it. It's super predictable. We have a big drop in triglycerides and usually a nice rise in HDL. Don't make me say it, the good cholesterol, hate that phrase. Anyway, we see the triglycerides sink, the HDL rises in most people. In some people it doesn't, but even if the HDL doesn't rise, if the HDL stays the same but the triglycerides do plummet, then the ratio still improves. You still have lower triglycerides relative to your HDL, and that ratio, at least so far as we know right now, is a way better indicator of your cardiovascular status than the total amount of cholesterol in your blood or than your LDL level. And so that's number one that happens. Number two, one of the most damaging things for blood vessels and for cardiovascular function is hypertension, high blood pressure. I recently did a huge video on hypertension. I'll link to it, or just go to my YouTube channel, you'll find it. Ketogenic diets very, very reliably improve hypertension. Why? Because in most cases, not all, but most cases, High blood pressure has nothing to do with the amount of salt you are eating and everything to do with your insulin level and your blood sugar level. So when you go on a ketogenic diet or you just cut your carbs way down, your blood sugar comes down and your insulin comes down and your blood pressure comes down. Something else that we find, inflammatory markers. I mean, I think there's a lot that we actually don't know about some of this stuff, but some of these biomarkers, some of these molecules that you can measure that seem to indicate an inflammatory state or damage to the blood vessels, these all get better on keto. If you do put stock into, I don't even know. I mean, there's a lot of in most people who do a low carb or ketogenic diet, right? I said the HDL comes up, the triglycerides go down. In most people, LDL comes down, and so the total cholesterol comes down. In some people, they have this response where their total cholesterol goes up and the LDL goes up a lot. If you follow my friend Dave Feldman, his website is cholesterolcode.com, code CODE. He's doing a lot of really interesting research as to whether this is harmful at all. If every single thing about your blood work has gotten better, your glucose is better, your insulin is better, your triglycerides are better, your HDL is better, inflammation markers are better, you feel better, your C-reactive protein is better, every sort of noticeable thing is better, but your LDL goes up. Is that cause for concern? I'm not really going to comment one way or the other. I'm not a physician, but if you believe that it is a cause for concern, you could go with the notion that on low carb or ketogenic diets, how should I say this? The nature of the particle that carries that LDL cholesterol is different when you've been doing a low carb or keto diet versus a higher carb diet. So you may have heard there's something called pattern A and pattern B with regard to LDL, the low density lipoprotein, not the cholesterol, but the particle, the little, ball that carries the cholesterol through your bloodstream. I think this is up for debate at this moment, but it seems to be, and even some of the sort of conventional cardiology world would agree to this, I think. The particles that are more harmful for cardiovascular health, more atherogenic, are what they call small, dense LDL. These little like BB gun pellets, small, dense, and that's pattern B, I think. Pattern A is less atherogenic, less harmful. They call them large, fluffy, or large, buoyant LDL particles. You can think of it as like a marble, the small, dense, versus like a balloon for the large, buoyant. I mean, that's oversimplification, but on ketogenic diets, pretty predictably, again, that LDL, even if the total number of LDL particles in your blood goes up and the amount of cholesterol in those particles goes up, the particle itself, the pattern switches from the B to the A. It switches from those small, dense marbles to those big, fluffy balloons, and that supposedly, as far as we know right now, is better for your cardiovascular health. So there's all this good stuff, and this is only tangentially related, but I'm sure you guys, many of you have heard of Jeff Volek. I don't remember who else was on this paper. Ron Krauss, I think, who's been a long-time low-carb researcher too. They've done some research looking at low-carb diets versus low-fat diets and what happens to the cardiovascular profile. And there was, I haven't read this paper in a while, so I might be saying it not completely accurately, but the gist of it is that the people on, so they can measure the amount of saturated fat in your bloodstream. They can take a blood sample and like separate out the individual kinds of fat that are actually floating in your bloodstream. And they did this with the low carb and low fat study groups. The low carb study group had eaten about triple the saturated fat that the low fat group did. So they ate about 3 times more saturated fat, but they had less saturated fat in the blood compared to the low fat group. And I don't know why I'm pointing over there. It's not like the study group is in my living room sitting right over there. Just trying to make the distinction of the two different groups. So yeah, despite the fact that the low carb group ate a lot more saturated fat. What ended up floating around in their blood was much less saturated fat. Why? Because when you overconsume carbohydrate, your body converts the excess carbs into something called palmitic acid. Palmitic acid is a saturated fat. 16 carbons for you nutrition geeks out there. I think it's C16. Anyway, it's a saturated fat. So when you are just eating, and does this happen just if you're just eating carbs? No, but if you're eating, I would say, a lot more carbs than your body can handle, it's going to turn into a lot of saturated fat in your bloodstream. So that even goes to show that what you eat doesn't even reflect in your bloodstream 100%. So I don't agree with the adage, you are what you eat. Some people will say you are what you digest and absorb, which is closer. I would say you are what your body does with what you digest and absorb, or what your body does with what you eat. Because let's say I do eat a stick of butter and some cheese and some fatty pork or whatever. Now, pork is half monounsaturated, but let's say I'm eating a crap ton of saturated fat. My blood doesn't have a lot of saturated fat in it. So no, I'm not what I eat. I am what my body does with what I eat. So let's see, we're over 20 minutes. I am trying to make shorter videos. Let me just think if there's anything I'm forgetting. I mean, if I thought ketogenic diets were dangerous, I would not have built my career out of helping people do them. I would not eat this way myself. Like, if I thought this was harmful, why would I be following a low carb or ketogenic diet? Now, there is something I should say. Any diet can be dangerous if you're an idiot about how you implement it. If you, like I'm not a doctor, this is not medical advice. If you have a medical condition that you are taking medication for, most especially type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, or high blood pressure, hypertension, if you are taking any medication that has anything to do with blood pressure or blood sugar, you must have physician or nurse practitioner or somebody supervising you to do this safely. Because keto can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Let's say you've had type 2 diabetes for 10 years and you've been on very high doses of insulin for 5 years. You cannot just do a ketogenic diet and keep taking the same amount of medicine, especially the same amount of insulin. You can potentially put yourself into a diabetic coma. You can potentially have hypoglycemic shock. Because if you needed this much insulin to medicate the 300 grams of carbohydrates you were eating a day, and now you're only eating 20 grams of carbohydrates a day, but you still took that same dose of insulin, guess what? Now your blood sugar bottoms out and you pass out. Maybe you pass out behind the wheel of a car. Maybe you pass out while holding a baby. So can keto be dangerous if you are uninformed and you do not implement it under the medical supervision that you might need for your circumstance? Yes. That doesn't mean that there's anything inherently dangerous to eating a diet that consists of eggs and fish and shellfish and poultry and pork and bison and lamb and beef and venison and vegetables and low sugar fruits and nuts and seeds and cheese and cream. There is nothing inherently dangerous about the foods you are eating and not eating the foods that you are avoiding. What can be dangerous is being a friggin' idiot, which is a danger factor for any diet. You can come into trouble on any diet if you're doing something that is obviously harmful for your body. So even on keto or any other diet, we know on keto people tend to need more sodium. Not everybody needs the extra salt, but many people do. This is even more true if you exercise a lot and if you sweat a lot. If you do a lot of outdoor work, I work at a local farm twice a week. You better believe I am chugging sodium on those days in the summertime in North Carolina. Yeah, those are high salt days. So if you're on keto and you're doing a great amount of physical exertion or sweating and you're not replacing those electrolytes, you could maybe potentially pass out. You could get dizzy. You could have a headache. You could have all kinds of issues. But that can happen on any diet where you're not getting adequate minerals or electrolytes. So really, there's so much fear mongering about this diet. And I think it has a lot more to do with ignorance. People just don't know. And because so many of the people who will tell you, oh, keto's dangerous, cannot even articulate why. You ask them to tell you why, and they don't know. Or they'll just say, well, I heard it's bad for your kidneys. Reader's Digest said it's bad for your bones. Okay, tell me something that actually matters. And B, I think some people, there's a lot of reservation about this way of eating because despite decades at this point of research showing that eating saturated fat or eating foods high in cholesterol are not bad at all for your cardiovascular health, there's still a great entrenchment of that belief that when you eat fat, in particular animal fat from beef, from pork and all that, that it's bad for you. Egg yolk, people still order egg white omelets in diners. Like, if you don't like the yolks, that's one thing, but don't order the egg white omelet because you think the yolk is bad for you. And the funny thing is, the people that will tell you keto's harmful, I'm looking out for your interest. Don't do keto because it's bad for you. Where were they when you were eating a bagel with grape jelly and a glass of orange juice for breakfast? How come they didn't say, hey, you know what's really bad for you? Jacking up to the freaking moon your blood sugar and insulin first thing in the morning. Where were they when you had just eaten 50 grams of sugar and 2 hours later you're going to the coffee shop for a scone and a latte? They were so concerned about your health then that they didn't say one freaking word, but now that you're eating a nice New York strip steak and a pile of broccoli, all hell is broken loose. Like, this is just ridiculous, you know what I mean? So is keto harmful? No. Can it lead you astray in the same way that any other way of eating can lead you astray if you have a particular situation that needs a little more professional monitoring? Yeah. That's not the same as it being a harmful way to eat. So anyone that's fear-mongering to you about this diet, you can just dismiss them immediately because they're just, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. If they do have a legitimate argument, listen to it. Maybe there is something legitimate to it. Maybe well, I heard you need more salt. Okay, then I'll be careful to eat more salt. Like you don't have to be a jerk about it. You can be diplomatic about it, but I'm just tired of people making others afraid of a way of eating that could literally save their life. Literally save their life, if not just change their life massively for the better. Regardless, it's not about weight. It could be about diabetes. It could be about lipedema or lymphedema. It could be about epilepsy. It could be about migraines. It could be about gout. It could be about rheumatoid arthritis. It could be about acne. It could be about any of these GERD, any other issue, non-alcoholic fatty liver, all these other things we know keto is really good for. That's it. It's almost half an hour. I'm cutting myself off. Thanks for watching. My website is 2itnutrition.com, or you can check out stallslayer.com. Links below to all those blog posts I mentioned about the protein fear-mongering, protein in bones, protein in kidneys, and to get the Stall Slayer. Remember, if you like keto without the crazy, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/2itnutrition. And that's my spiel. See you next time. Bye-bye.